On the 8th day of the impeachment trial of VP Inday, guess who they had? The primary witness of the prosecution was NBI Director Melvin Matibag. The first thing that was in contention by the defense was whether or not Director Matibag was there by virtue of a subpoena. Director Matibag refused to answer the question directly and instead kept saying things like, "Well, I was on the witness list." The defense was having none of that. Eventually, he had to admit, no, he was not there by virtue of any subpoena. Why is this important? Because it exposes a scheme. There was an intent to present Director Matibag as a witness. But for what? It became apparent later on. During the course of his testimony, he talked about the investigation into the grave threats charge against Vice President Inday Sara. On cross-examination, the defense asked, "Do you have any personal knowledge of anything that you narrated?" Of course not. Strike two. During the course of his testimony, he also introduced a document, allegedly an affidavit by Arturo Las Cañas. Arturo Las Cañas is supposed to be that self-confessed member of the Davao Death Squad who testified against Rodrigo Duterte. Surprise, surprise, the affidavit contains an allusion to then Mayor Sara Duterte. Director Matibag then was asked to read out passages from that affidavit, at which point the defense had had enough. Attorney Vinduan finally was forced to object. Because if you look at it, the document was not signed, at least not original signing, not a wet signature, and was not notarized. In fact, they couldn't even submit that as evidence, although they did have it marked. Why can't you submit that as evidence? It's not admissible because it has to be authenticated and it has to be presented in the proper format, that is, notarized. Wala yun eh. But Congresswoman Jinky Luistro insisted on a narration by Director Matibag via reading out loud passages from that contested document. In short, what the prosecution was doing was trying to introduce through the back door evidence that would not be admissible. That document could not be presented. And so what they did was they asked Director Matibag to narrate it. But even then, Senate Presiding Officer Chis Escudero said, even by itself, that's hearsay. Hearsay by the original affiant, if he was in fact an affiant, meaning Las Cañas himself was narrating hearsay. Now, Matibag was narrating triple hearsay. In other words, this was junk. It's not evidence. It should not have been presented at all. But they wanted a show. The prosecution wanted inflammatory, highly discriminatory statements that could otherwise not be admitted as evidence, and they were trying to get it in sneakily. According to Congresswoman Jinky Luistro, they were only narrating what happened during the investigation. No, that's not true. That's not what they were doing. They were narrating inflammatory statements that are highly prejudicial against Sara Duterte, despite the fact that as evidence, it wouldn't stand up in court. So, what an exciting day 8, because Senator Pia Cayetano and the defense succeeded in shooting the whole thing down. So much for this sneaky attempt to get in through the back door.